All right, so let's wait on that. Okay, and let's minimize this. All right. And then let me share my screen now. All right, excellent. So we're ready to go. Any questions before we get started? Any concerns? Okay, I get a message about. All right, that's recording. Okay. Yeah, YouTube lets me know whether I'm recording or not. All right, let's see. Why is this not moved to bottom? Okay. Does anybody know how to make the dock in Zoom auto hide? Presumably it auto hides, but it's not auto hiding for me. Let's see the annotations. Hide names, hide video panel, hide floating meeting controls. But I want the chat. How do I show the chat? Chat. Okay, so I can turn on the chat. I can leave the chat on. But maybe I can hide this. Hide floating. Oh, okay, there we go. I'll leave the chat on so that let's see if folks are asking questions. All right. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Actually, be right back. I need to pause this for a second. Be right back. All right. Okay, so everybody can see my screen? All right, good. Yeah, so let's see. So this week, the fourth week, we have started talking about single page applications. Up to this point, right, with the first week we talked about doing some static content using HTML, CSS, Bootstrap. We then introduced JavaScript and jQuery as a mechanism that allowed us to manipulate the DOM programmatically, and that as we manipulate the DOM, we change what the user sees, right? So we also mentioned that jQuery is a thin layer that virtualizes the browser so that we can talk to the browser at a higher level, right? That is consistent across all vendors, across all versions of JavaScript, instead of having to deal with each vendor independently. So today we're going to introduce React.js. It's going to create another layer of abstraction on top of the DOM, right? And it actually has a virtual DOM that that it allows it to perform better or faster than if you were talking to directly to the DOM. So yeah, React.js is a library put out by Facebook that is going to allow us to create single page applications. And the way we talked about single page applications when we met earlier this week, we said that single page applications were those that had an HTML entry point that was loaded into memory, into the DOM, into the browser, and then you'd be able to add, remove content without having to and navigate, implement an entire application, even with navigation from different pages and different main screens, without actually loading those HTML documents, right? Because that gives you somewhat of a jarring look and feel, a jarring behavior, user experience. That's it's much smoother, right? If instead we manipulate the DOM dynamically by loading content and manipulating the content programmatically. So we already have created the project earlier this week, and we introduced ES6, right? We're going to be using the newer version of JavaScript, which is ECMAScript 6, and so for throughout the rest of the semester. And the first time that we're going to be starting to use this is within React.js. Okay. All right, so we did create it. It's over here. We built it early this week, right? There it is. WebDev SP21 01 Januzzi Klein React. Okay, and this is where we played around early this week. Sorry, somebody had a question? No? Okay. All right, so here's a set of slides that kind of quickly introduces React real quick in a hello world application, like the simplest possible React application that you can think of, right? So here's an introduction to React and summarizes the steps that we already taken, right? We used npx, right? Npx is the Node Package Manager execution version, right? That allows you to execute, right? It allows you to execute Node packages or Node modules. And this one in particular is put out by Facebook, right? And we can use it to create our wonderful React application, right? So this was just showing you how to do it. Obviously, this is not the name that I would want you to use. So instead, use a name like the one we suggest here, right? That starts with WebDev, SP21, meaning Spring 21, your section, your username or something that uniquely identifies you, then client, and then React, right? I called it here, to be funny, I call it my wonderful React app. Once you create the React application, you can go into the directory. This creates a brand new directory. If you go in there, you can run the application by saying npm start, right? So npm, again, npm is a Node Package Manager that's installed with Node, right? When you install Node.js. And here's a really simple application. What it creates under the source directory. The source directory has an entry point, which is index.js, right? Index.js. So it's this one right here. There it is, index.js. If you open that up, you'll find a couple things. I've slightly modified this, but almost nothing. But basically, what you'll find is that most of the files that we're going to be working with, most of the JavaScript files that we're going to be writing from now on, most of them are going to be importing the React library. Okay, import, like we discussed earlier this week, right? It's a new keyword in the new JavaScript 6 language, the latest version of the language, right? Which allows you to load any other libraries or other files if those files export, right? So remember that the new language allows you to be very much like Java and C#, where you can have modules and you can load those modules, very much like that. So yeah, so this is most of the files that JavaScript are gonna be loading this import. In this particular case, we're gonna be using a React DOM. Now this React DOM is what binds the HTML, right, and the React library, right? It allows React to manipulate the browser's DOM, right? And the reason there's a dedicated part of the library that is specific for manipulating the browser, the reason is broken out. It's not part of the core React library. It's actually a separate library. It's because React not only can be used to create dynamic web applications, it can be used to create dynamic mobile applications, right? And in a phone, there is no browser, so there is no DOM. Instead, it's a separate rendering engine. So React DOM is the rendering engine of React that knows how to render an application in the browser, in the DOM, right? There's another one for the mobile, for phones, right? That's called React Native, and React Native is the rendering engine of React that knows how to render phone applications, right? There's also desktop versions of React, right, where you can build React applications, right, so you can run on your desktop, right? They're not web-based. Makes sense? Broke out those two libraries into two separate parts. Here's the core library, and there's the library that knows how to render for the browser. Let's see. These are a couple of things that I've added for Bootstrap and Font Awesome. We'll talk about that in a minute. It also has a CSS library, a CSS file. There it is, CSS. There's not much in it, right? There's not much in it. But just to show you that no longer are we going to load CSS files.
Professor, I had a small question.
Yes.
Professor, you said React Native is for rendering for mobile, right?
Mobiles and also tablets and anything like that. Yes.
So it's not used for let's say mobile browsers like Safari or Google Chrome when you open in the mobile, or you can use React DOM for it.
Yeah, no, even for a phone, if it has to do anything with Safari or Chrome browsers, you would still use React DOM.
But then if I'm building an app, then I would use React Native or maybe the other one.
Yeah, if you want to use the native components that the phone has, right?
Okay.
So an iOS button as opposed to an HTML button, right?
Okay.
You would use React Native, right? If you want to use the HTML button, then you would use React DOM.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So now, thank you for your question. So instead of loading JavaScript, instead of loading CSS or anything like that, or even images, okay, we're always going to be using the import right from within JavaScript. So for instance, this CSS, instead of loading it like we normally do, right, we normally would do it in HTML. In HTML, we would have a link, and in that link, right, we can link CSS files and things like that. We're no longer going to do that. We're going to be able to do that all from within JavaScript, right? So you can import even CSS files, okay? You can also import other JavaScript files. So this one, for instance, this app is actually a file. It's a JavaScript file that lives in the same directory. Also notice that it's missing the .js. See that? It's missing the .js. And the reason it's missing .js is because .js is the default extension, right? So it's implied. If you don't put the extension, it is implied that you are loading the JavaScript file, which is this one right here. So you're loading all the JavaScript files, style sheets. Let's see. npx is for executing. So yeah, exactly. What's the difference? So npm is for downloading libraries and installing it and copy it locally. All those libraries, typically, they're stored under a directory. So any new package that you download and any new package that you install, they're copied into this standard directory called node_module. See that? So that's what you use npm for. npx allows you to run if that component or that module is executable. You can run it like we did earlier to install React, the new application. Is it better practice to have the .js even if by default? No, you can leave it out. You can absolutely leave it out. It's very, very common. Again, this new language is all about being very terse, being very compact. Okay. All right. So notice this app. This app is just another JavaScript file, and that JavaScript file is basically just a function. It's only a function. That's all it is, right? It's just a function that has a return. When you call that function, that's what it returns. So basically, what React does is that it allows you to break up a large application into smaller little functions, right? So it encourages you, right, to think of the application. If you're looking at a web page, right, to look at all the little pieces, all the rectangles in a web page, and think of them each one as its own little function, right? So you can break it up into multiple pieces, as opposed to having a really, really large HTML document. Now you can break it up into small little functions and then build them, right? You can call them, and then you can render the entire page in terms of these functions that you call. So let me show you. If we run this, right, you can run it. You can run it by saying npm start, like the slide says, right? Npm start. It starts running it, and it's going to render whatever is inside app, whatever that returns, which is this one. Right now, it's not returning anything. Let's just say hello world. Okay, so if we run it, oops, I think I ran it already. There it is, hello world. Okay. Yeah. So here's whatever. So it's returning this div, right, with this hello world, right, and that's what's being replaced here with this app, right? You can replace this whole thing and put all the HTML here. I can say here h1, right? I can say hello world, right? And what React DOM render basically does is that it will inject whatever content is the first argument. This render function has two arguments. The first argument is what I want to render, and the second argument is where do I want to put it. This is almost like jQuery, right? jQuery creating the DOM, right, using $, and then you put the DOM element in there, and then injecting it and doing .html, putting that content inside of and appending it to something. Yes. So this is something very much that you can imagine yourself implementing with jQuery, right? Where you're appending to a specific element with a particular ID, where you can grab that ID, you can grab that element by doing something like $, hash, and then the ID, right? And then you can inject the content. So this is not far. This is not really that far for what you can do with jQuery. Okay. So having done that, if I can go back, notice that indeed now I have this h1, right? This is h1. Let me refresh. There it is. Okay. Okay. Now what
Professor, I had a small question.
Sure.
So in the JavaScript class, you told the way we make classes is by using the function keyword, and then we can, write new and then the function name, and then the object would be made. So like in React.js, this is a function, or this is a class, or it's the same thing? Because I think there are two parts of it: functional React.js and then class based
Yes,
React.
I will be introducing all that. Yes.
So right now I should consider this as a function only, right?
Well, right now there's not even a function, right? We're just having a plain old HTML. And then we'll introduce classes, we'll introduce functions, and why would you use one or the other? Yeah, it's all part of the curriculum. Yep.
Okay.
Let's see, what's the question? Gotcha, thanks. This function also has classes, you told. Yeah, it could be classes or functions. Yeah, we'll talk about both of them. So Now, some folks might be getting some error messages from their IntelliJ. You need to turn on, if you go to Preferences in IntelliJ, and if you go to Languages and Frameworks, and you click on JavaScript, you need to select this option right here, React, and then JSX, right? So that it can understand ECMA 6, and it can understand the JSX syntax. Otherwise, it'll highlight everything red, right? And then you say, okay. Right, and then it should work just fine. It'll understand everything. All right, yeah. So we have this hello world, and now what React promotes is the fact that if you're going to have, imagine that you had a lot of content that you want to inject into the root, and so we want to create, break it up into smaller different pieces, right? So instead of having the content here, we can put this content in a separate JavaScript file, right? So we can say, for instance, we can create a brand new file here and say hello, and say hello JavaScript, and we say hello.js, okay? And in here we can say import React, right, from React. And in here we can have a function. Now this function could be written using the old JavaScript version or the new version, right? ES6. Let's see something on the file. This function is also a class like yeah. So for instance, it could use the old style function, right? And whatever, and I can call this hello. And whatever I return from here, if I return. And I can say h1, right? Hello, from React function. Okay. I can import that function from hello. Oh, I didn't export it. So export default hello. Right, I can say ./hello. There it is, right? And then I can use hello here, hello, and close it. And then this would render our new hello from React function, right? So whatever that function returns is what gets rendered. Okay, right? So this allows you to think about the application in terms of a function that can work together to build something. All right. Now there's two styles, right, that we're going to be considering, right? Functional components like this, right, which can be just functions, and they can use either the ES5 or ES6 version, right? So if I change this into const and I convert this into the new style, right, this works just the same, right, from React ES6 function, right? This works just the same, right? Either style works. We're going to prefer this new style, the ES6 style, okay? So yeah, there's functional components. What is the use of default? Yeah, so when we looked at ES6, right, we could use maybe not default. We can use that to just export hello. But here now you have to do the destructor. You have to destruct, because what you get, right, is export. Wait a minute. Export like that. Oops. Okay, so when you can export each element, you can have any number of functions in here. You can have a lot of functions, right? So you can have a const, function 1, right? You can have a whole bunch of other functions, function 1, 2, 3, right? 2 and 3. And some of them can be exported. So export. And some of them not, right? So here I'm exporting function 2, I'm exporting function hello. So I can import hello. So everything that's being exported is exported as if it were one big object. And with that object, I need to use the destructor syntax that we looked at yesterday, right? So that I can bind whatever's being exported from here, that object that is being exported, I can bind it to a local variable hello, of whatever is being exported. So I can bind hello. I can also bind maybe function2. Function2, I can bind it. I can have both functions. But I cannot bind function1. Function1 is not available to me. See that? It highlights it that it's a syntax error that is not available. I can't call that, right? But I can call function2. Okay, so in function2 I can have function2 can say, I can say return, right? Return. Let's see. This can be h1 hello from function2, right? And so this I can render either hello or I can render function2. Okay. Function2 return export function2. What's export hello? Why are you not rendering? Did I spell it wrong? Function2. Why are you not? Hello is rendering, right? So can we functional class and access the object? No, you can what we typically do, right, is that we don't export all these. What we typically do is that we have a specific function, right, that is going to be the default one that we're going to export, the ones that renders the whole thing. Typically we don't do this, right? What we do is that we export defaults, the one that we actually want to render, right? And so now, because it's defaults, we don't need to include it in the destructor, syntax, right? We can leave it out so that, for instance, app, right, is going to be the default is going to be the default function that gets exported, so that it doesn't need to use the syntax of destructing. Okay, so for instance, this one is hello, right? And because it's the default, right, then we don't need to destruct it. If we remove the default, and we add here export, right, then we need to add it. Now it doesn't work. We need to put it in the destructor, like that. See that, right? So default is just a means of easily importing something without having to use this extra destructor syntax. That's all. It's just for convenience, right? We typically export the main function that's going to be doing the most rendering. Okay. All right, we're going to practice quite a bit. So yeah, there's two styles. One is just plain old functions, right, that can return different content that we want to render. The other style that is very common as well, that you'll find in React.js, is using classes, right? You can either use functions or you can use classes, right? And there's certain things that you can do with one that you can't do with the other, right? Some of them have limitations, one and the other, right? So let's take a look at the other implementation of implementing hello, but using the class, right? So I'm going to create another file here, and I'm going to call it hello class. Okay, and same thing, we're going to import React from React, right? And this version, we're going to use class, and this is going to be hello class. Okay, and it's going to extend. It's going to inherit certain behaviors, right? I'm not going to be just any class, but I want to be a class that is going to implement certain behaviors that I can render in a DOM object, okay? So we're going to extend the following class under the React namespace, right? So hello class extends React component, and that component has a function called render, right? And whatever this render function returns is what is going to be rendered on the screen, right? So here we have a return, right? This is what is going to be rendered. So this would be H1, hello from a hello class. Okay. Okay. And we need to export it. So we're going to say export default. Again, if I don't put default, I'm going to have to do the deconstructor, right? I only put default just to make it more convenient so that you don't need to put the destructor, right? So export default hello class, right? So now from my top level index, I can import the hello class. Notice that it finds it, my IDE finds it, right? And it can auto complete, right? So here I can replace this hello with hello class, and it renders as hello from hello class. See that? Everybody good? Now that I can have all these different types of content, right? Let's see, in app, what do I have? Hello world from app, right? So I have that. I have hello class. How about I want to combine them? I can start combining these things together, right? I want to render both the app. I want to render the app, right? I want to render the hello. Okay, notice that it's giving me some errors, right? And the reason it's giving me errors is that render only takes a single argument, and it cannot parse these three things. What are those three things? So we need to combine it so that it's one thing, right? So we can wrap it inside of a div, right? So that this div is going to contain all three things. Okay, this div is going to have an app, a hello, and a hello class, and that's going to render all three things, right? Here's my app, here's my React function, and here's my class, right? So again, you can imagine, right, that now I can build really, really complex things in terms of smaller little things, right? Whatever I ask you to build, you always should look for opportunities, right, to break up this large screen that you want to render in terms of smaller functions that are going to be responsible for small snippets of the screen, okay? And that's exactly what we're going to ask you to do in the upcoming assignment. All right, so let's go look at the assignment and see what we're going to ask you to do. All right, let's look at the assignment. Okay, so this is the upcoming assignment, the third assignment.
Professor, so sorry, can you just show the code once more, how you rendered three components together?
Oh, I just wrapped it inside of a div.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, so here's a single page application. We're going to be continuing with the same theme of building the learning management system. The first half of the semester, we're going to focus on the instructor side, right? And the second half of the semester, we'll focus on the student side, right? So first of all, we ask you to install Node.js, which you might already have done that, and we ask you to just test it. Verify that you can create a file and then run it. Okay, just to make sure that Node.js is running. We ask you to create a project using the create React app, right? Using npx create React app. And here we give you a sample name of an application, right? We give you some really bogus names so that you don't copy this literally. This will be web dev. This will be Spring 21. This will be, instead of Charlie Brown, it'll be your name, and then client, and then a React, okay? Then to just start the application, just to verify that it's working, you can cd into that directory. It creates a directory, and you can say npm start, and it should bring up the default React application that we ran on Monday, right? We then ask you to install Bootstrap, Font Awesome, and React Router. So Bootstrap, you already know what that is, right? And the way you install Bootstrap is that you do npm install Bootstrap. Okay, and what's that going to do? What's that going to do is going to download Bootstrap, and it's going to copy it, right? All libraries, when you install them, they're copied into node_module, right? So you can search here for Bootstrap. There it is. See that? Bootstrap has been downloaded, and in here you have your CSS, right? There's all your CSS. Even the JavaScript is there for Bootstrap, right? So same thing for Font Awesome. We're going to install Font Awesome. We're going to install the free version of Font Awesome. There's a paid version, but we're just going to use the free version. And so it installs it also locally here. There it is, Font Awesome, right? And in there, you can go and you have your CSS and you have all your CSS in there, okay? You're also going to install the React Router DOM, right? So React Router DOM is a library that's going to allow us to implement navigation, right? You know, very much like you can, if you click here, if you click a hyperlink, you can navigate to different screens. Since it's a single page application, we're not going to actually navigate to another page, to another HTML document. Instead, we're going to swap content, right? Depending on what you click on the screen, we're going to remove this content from the DOM, and then we're going to show some other content in the DOM, right? And to do that, we're going to use this library, React Router DOM, right? But more on that next week, right? This week, we're not going to do that. We're not going to use this just yet. All right, any question? Where do we get the exact names of libs to install by terminal? There they are. These are it. I give it to you exactly like that. That's the exact names of the libraries. When you swap content, will the part of the website after the slash change? So like home, yes, we will do that, right? That's how React Router DOM does. That's what it does. It changes the URL and it hijacks the underlying framework, the underlying mechanism, right? That usually when you change URL, right? You typically the default behavior for the browser, if you change the URL, it looks for that document, right? It loads that document and then it replaces the current document. So what React.js does, and many of the single page application frameworks and libraries, what they do is they hijack that mechanism and they replace it with another mechanism, right? That if you change the URL, they're going to know what to do, and instead of dumping the HTML document and loading a new HTML document, what they do is that they're going to swap and modify the DOM dynamically, and that's what React Router DOM does, right? But we're going to take a look at that next week. Which directory should we make sure these installations occur in? Yeah, all these installations are from the root directory. Yeah, so install blah, 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 as follows. All commands are from root of project. Yeah, so remember, yeah, all these are from the root of the project. Okay.
Professor, I had a small question.
Yes.
So like we're doing npm install bootstrap / save. I mean, we could just import the style and the script in the .html file too. Would
yes,
that
you
work
could.
fine too?
Yeah, you could do that as well. But
so
I want you to learn
which one is a better practice, and like pros and cons maybe?
Oh no, definitely use it the npm way because it's programmatic. You can programmatically decide which pieces you want and to load them whenever you need, as opposed to wholesale loading everything you need, right? So yes, follow the instructions here.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so once you've installed them, you can load them up. You can load them up if you go to your index.js. If you go into your index.js, right here, right? Notice that I have already done this, right? I have done an import, bootstrap dis cs bootstrap min.css. And I've done the same thing for the importing of the Font Awesome. Okay.
Professor, one question.
Yes.
So when we actually import it in our HTML via the script tag or something like that,
yeah,
it's not actually residing on our machine, right? It's just pulling it from somewhere, or does it actually save it in the memory? Because here I think we are storing the whole library in the node modules folder.
Yeah, it's downloading it and pulling it right under in here, right? So yeah, so it's not using a CDN. Right, it's not using a CDN. It's using a local copy of the library.
Right. So isn't that would that be bad in some scenario?
So in production, right, when this is going to go out for development, this is what you want, right? When you're developing locally on a machine, When you're going into production, right, usually this will go through a build process, and that build process, right, can be configured to couple ways. One of them, it could be configured to concatenate all these CSS files into one single file, right?
Oh, like minifying it.
And minifying it and reducing this the space and the memory and blah 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 blah, right? Also, the JavaScript does the same thing. Instead of having 30 different JavaScript files, they all get concatenated into single one, and it gets minified and removes all sorts of things, right? It also can be configured that in production, right, when it gets deployed into Heroku or whatnot, it'll replace all these imports to use CDN versions of this, so that instead of using your local copies, it'll use CDN libraries, right, that have been optimized, that are already on the web, and oftentimes these are cached by the browser, so the browser doesn't even need to download them. Right, so that if you've visited other websites such as Facebook and Twitter, all these websites probably will have already downloaded these libraries, right? So that when the browser gets to your website, by the time it gets to you, the browser says, you already have these libraries downloaded because you have visited all these other more popular websites, right? So I don't have to download them again. Okay. So all that is part of the build process when it gets deployed.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. So we're gonna for development purposes, it's a good idea to just have everything locally so that your IDE can do auto completion. It can find, do and do all those things, which you don't get if you go straight for CDN. Okay. So notice also that I've loaded these libraries before the index.css, right? Because index.css is where I can maybe override any styles that I don't like from Font Awesome or from Bootstrap, right? So notice the order in which I've loaded this, right? So index.css is your application specific styling, right, for the rest of the application. Make sense? All right, so I wrote all that. Okay, so first we're going to ask you to create a course service, very much like we implemented in the previous assignment, right? I had you write a user service, right, that was able to fetch users and create users and delete users and update users, right? This time around, we're going to ask you to build something similar, but for courses that it can create courses, delete courses, update courses, find courses, right? And it's going to have very much the same style, right? The same naming conventions from what you wrote for the users, right? So it's going to have create course, find all courses, find course by ID, and whatnot. Yep, and they're described here. You're also asked to use the generic server that you used for the previous assignment. You're going to be using the same generic server, but for this time, you're going to be working with courses as opposed to users. Okay. Again, remember to use your NUID. I saw that some folks were still using my Giannunzi. Please refrain from using my ID, or instead use yours. Okay.
So sorry, I think that was me. I forgot to change it, and I added some objects, and I wanted to delete it because I added it, but it didn't let me delete.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we building? So we're building. This is what we're building. Okay. So this is very similar to what you had implemented in the first assignment. You created a course manager, right, with a tabular list of courses, right? But in that assignment, it was static, right? It did not change. You weren't able to create a course, delete a course, update a course. You couldn't do any of that, right? But this time around, we're going to create a component, a React component that will allow you to actually manipulate the list of courses, right? So it's going to be responsive. In that it's going to have a, in the extra small screen, it's only going to show just the title of the course and then some buttons on the right hand side. And as you stretch it and make it big, right, it'll show an additional column owned by, which right now it could be just static me. Okay, and as you make it even wider, right, it'll show an additional column, last modified, right? And So this is for extra small screens, medium screens, and for large screens. Okay. So it's responsive, just like in the first assignment was supposed to be responsive. All right. But now we're going to add a couple of things here, right? For instance, we're going to have a pencil that is going to allow us to edit the name of the course, right? So for instance, if you click on pencil, that row is going to be replaced. It'll replace the label, the name of the course will be replaced with an input field where you can type you can change the name of the course. You can say okay with a check mark, right? And then once you say okay, it'll go back to the normal layout, right? Where we have an icon, the name, the title, and then the pencil, right? If you edit and you click on delete on the X button, right, it will remove that row and will remove it from the server too. Okay. You can create new courses by typing the name of the course here. You can type in the name of the course, right, and clicking on plus. And the plus can be either this plus here or there's another plus down here. Okay. This plus is stuck, stuck at the bottom and on the right, right? Doesn't matter if you scroll up and down, this is stuck on the bottom right. Okay. Let's see, what else? I think that's it. Right, so you can reuse the same HTML that you wrote from the first assignment. Feel free to bring in all those HTML, all those styles, all that work that you had done in the previous assignment. Feel free to bring that into this assignment. Okay, a couple more icons here. There's a folder icon. It doesn't do anything, but nevertheless, include the folder icon. Also, there's a sort icon here, right? Again, it doesn't do anything just yet. We'll talk about sorting a little later, but for now, it doesn't do anything, right? But nevertheless, try to make it look as close as possible to this. Obviously, you can change the fonts and the color scheme, and make it look a little more like you. But the main functionality should be there. Okay, there's a new button, right? That I don't know if we had it in the previous assignment. There's a layout toggle button over here, right? That if you click it, right, it allows you to toggle between this table format and a grid format, right? Which we'll see in a minute. Let's see, is there a question on the chat? Are we expected to import our entire work so far into our React app, or will course list be only content? Will be the only content? Yeah. So right now the assignment explains it, right? So yes, we're going to bring in most of the content, but the only thing that's going to be dynamic is going to be the list, the course list, right? The editor, all that can stay static, right? We'll make it dynamic in the next assignment, right? But for now, the only part that's going to be dynamic is the course list. For the assignment due today, in all future assignments, are we required to use the same function and element names as those listed in the assignment document? I.e., would we lose points of function name add user and opposed to create user? No, you're free to implement all those using your own naming convention, unless explicitly addressed in the document. If it's not explicitly addressed in the document, then no, you're not required to. There's only a few things that I do ask you that you should name explicitly in a particular way. For instance, I ask you to have the course table implemented in a file called course table, and it needs to be inside of a directory called components/course table, right? So if it explicitly asks you to do a specific name, please stick to those names. But other than that, if you don't ask you, then no, don't. All right, so when you click on this grid here, okay, another question: can we update our existing course page for this assignment? The course page for this assignment. I'm not sure what you mean. What course page? You mean the index file?
Hi, Professor. I meant, so we already have the course dashboard. Yeah, this kind of page. So I don't remember. Yeah, maybe course manager. And my question is it okay if we update it, or do we need to create another page?
So what you have is running in another server, in a Java server, right? And that, so that HTML that implements the course list, you can bring it over this is a brand new project, right? That has no content whatsoever. So you're going to bring that HTML. You can use that HTML if you want. You don't have to. You can bring that HTML and build this component using that HTML that you brought in from that other project.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. Okay, thank you. That's a ridiculous question. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I got it.
Yeah. All right. So if you click on this grid here, right? If you click on this grid, this whole thing, the bottom half, the table component, is going to be replaced by a different rendering. The top is going to stay the same. The top is going to stay the same, right? And you're still going to have this button here, right? And it's going to be replaced by this content. Okay, notice that the top half stays, the top here stays the same. The button is the same, right? But it gets replaced by the content that's going to live in course grid, right? In CourseGrid.js. And CourseGrid.js lives in this directory. So CourseGrid.js, what it does is that it renders the courses in a grid fashion, right? So if the screen is too small, it only renders one single course, right? And then you can scroll and look at the other courses. But if you start making it bigger, right, and it becomes in the small, then you can see two courses side by side. If you make it a little bigger into medium screens, you can see 3 courses, right? If you make it a little bit bigger in the large screens, you can see 4 courses, right? And if you make it even bigger, you can find 6 courses, right? Now, if the courses don't fit, right, they wrap and they go into the next row. Right, you can see them in the next row. All right. So even though here I'm only showing 2 rows, I mean 1 row, right? Obviously, there's a row below showing the next set of courses down below. Okay. And just like in the table row, where I can edit a row here, I can edit. These are called cards, right? So this is a course grid showing the course grid, and each one of these is a course card. Just like this is a course table, and each one of these is a course row. Okay, it's a course row. This is a course grid that contains many course cards. Okay, so each card, right, can also be edited. Just like I can edit each course row, I can edit each course card, right? And to edit it, each course card should have a pencil at the bottom right, right? I only added the pencil in my large screens, right? But it should show all the time. It should show in the extra small, medium, and large, right? So you should always have a pencil, right? If you click that pencil, what you get is it replaces the name of the course. It replaces the title of the course, so you can edit the title, right? And you have an OK here, which saves it, right? And when you save it, it goes back to the non-editing mode, right? Or you can click on X and it removes the course, and it's gone from the list. Yes? It is okay that you can edit multiple courses at the same time, right? It doesn't mean that, right, they're not mutually exclusive. So I can edit, you can click on edit, right? And you can edit, 3 courses at the same time. Same thing with the rows. You can click on edit, right? And they all become input fields, so you can edit each one at a time. Okay? All right, and notice that the toggle changes. See that? The toggle changes, and it becomes a list. So if you click on that list, then it goes back to the table, to the table rendering. So you can toggle back and forth on what you want to see there. Okay? All right. If you click on a course, or if you click on the button here, or if you click on the title, right, it navigates to a course editor. Now the course editor is going to be just all your code that you already have, that you already built for the first assignment. You don't have to change it, right? Take the entire HTML, you're going to bring it over, right? You're going to bring it over to this new project, okay? And you're going to wrap it inside of a function, right? And you're going to put it in a file called course editor.js, so that when you click on the course, it navigates to the editor. Right? It navigates to the editor. Now that editor is static. It's not dynamic, right? It's just plain old HTML, well, embedded instead of a function, right? And then you can later in the next assignment, we're going to make the course editor editable, right? We're going to make that dynamic. But for this part, we're not going to have it dynamic. All right. Okay, so all this needs to be deployed in a brand new Heroku website, right, with a new URL and a brand new GitHub repository. Okay. Now for Heroku, you're going to need to follow these instructions here. You're going to have to add a build pack, right? A build pack for React. Okay, so follow those instructions, and it'll work on Heroku. Okay. All right, everybody good? All right, so what I'm going to do is that, like I did for the previous assignment, I'm going to start coding. I'm going to give you a demo on how you will get started, right? I'm going to get you going, right? Build some of these things for you, right? And then I'm going to leave a few things undone, right? So that you can go and do it yourself. Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
I'm sorry. Yeah. In the XS screen, will we be storing the data on a server of sorts? Yes. Right. The courses. You know, when you create a course, when you delete a course, when you update a course, you're going to be updating. You're going to be using your service, right? This service that you wrote here, course service, to talk to the generic server, right? Same thing that you did for the users. Now, this looks very much like the users, doesn't it? You know, your users. But now we're going to be doing it for courses, right? And instead of using jQuery, we're going to be using React. All right. And I'm going to get you started. All right, let's get started. All right, let's see. So React, you know, encourages you to, when you look at a page like this, you know, to start thinking, you know, how can I break this up into functions, right? Into classes, into reusable components, right? It promotes you doing that. Right, so for instance, you might say, well, maybe this top half over here, maybe that could be one thing, right? One component, right? And maybe, you know, this bottom half could be another component, right? And maybe each row could be a component, right? So there's already like 3 components that might be useful there. So same thing over here, right? You could say, well, this component might be the same component that I was using earlier, right? This component would be the same, so I could reuse that, right? Maybe this down bottom here could be a component, and then each one of these could be another component, right? So it starts to force you in thinking, you know, how could I write this and break it up into smaller pieces, right? Now, just like in any software engineering application that you're developing, it depends how granular or how coarse you might want to make your functions, right? How reusable and whatnot. So same principles apply here, right? You know, how many layers do you want your application to be? Maybe it's too many layers, maybe it's too few. You know, you want to be very shallow, or you want to be very deep? The same thing applies here. I mean, should each button be its own component? Maybe that's overdoing it, right? Should each image be its own component? Maybe that's too much, right? Will we be using your API? Yes, the same API. The same exact API that we used for the previous assignment, you're going to be using it this time around, right? But instead of students or users, you'll be doing courses. All right, so let's get started. So this is suggesting that we're going to we implement a course manager component way at the top, right? The first, you know, something that represents this whole thing, right? This whole thing we're going to call the course manager, and it's going to have, you know, all these subcomponents, right? The course table, or the course grid, and we need to be able to toggle between the two. Okay, so let's do that, right? So you can practice both styles. Remember, there's two styles. There is a functional style and there's a class style. Okay, so we're going to ask you, so you get a chance to practice both of them, even though functions are preferred over classes in many ways. There are limitations with both cases, right? And so we're going to ask you to implement the table using classes and the grid using functions, right? So you get to practice on using either one. Okay, so let's do that. Let's do that. So let's see, let's throw this away. Let's throw this away. So what would be, again, we're building this big application, right? And the application contains a course manager, right? A course manager. It also contains a course editor, right? So we can start building these things, right? And let's see, we can start building these things. So you can say, all right, so where should we put this? Where should we put our components that we are building? Well, a very common place where that directory structure for building React applications is to have a directory where you put all your components. You know, that's a very common convention, right? There is a directory that contains all your rendering components. Let's see, question. Why are functions preferred? Yeah, so functions are preferred because they're easier to test. They're easier to isolate from its surrounding dependencies, right? You want to be able to create unit tests that you can test a function where you can pass arguments, right? And it evaluates their arguments, and when it comes back, you can compare it against expected value. So functions are very, very easy to test. Instead, classes, you need to instantiate it. Classes can change state over time, and so to test it, you need to not only instantiate, you need to set the class at a particular state, and then validate that after certain functions methods that you call on that class, verify that the state has changed correctly against some expected finite state machine, right? So they're much harder to test. So functional programming, functional components are preferred over the classes because of that. Okay, so let's create the. We can maybe have our top our top level application be this app. It's already built. It's already built here, and so let's load that from here. Maybe we can say just load app. Okay, load app, which is this one, which loads just this div. It already has a nice bootstrap container fluid, right? Hello world from app, right? And let's see what it renders. It renders as that. Let's re-render that. Okay, there it is. And what do we have here? Well, we have at least a course manager, which is going to be this table and this grid. And we need we also is going to have the course editor, right? So let's build those components. Okay. Index will have an error. No, I don't think so. No, right. So let's create a course manager. So JavaScript. So this will be course manager. Okay, and let's use the class style. The class style is right here. Now, I don't believe I asked you to use either style for this. I'm just going to demonstrate. I'm going to build one using a class. I'm going to demonstrate one using a function. So let's do import React from React. So a class would be built as follows, right? So we do class course manager. Notice the naming convention. Classes are capitalized using camel casing with the first letter capitalized, just like you would for Java or C#, whereas the file names is just course dash manager, all lowercase. So it's going to extend React.component, okay, and this is going to have a render function, which is going to have a return, right? And this return is going to be a div. Well, let's start off with something simple, just h1 course manager. Okay, and we're going to export it. So export default course manager. Okay, now we can load it, right? From our app application, we can load that. We can import it. We can say import our course manager. There it is. Yeah, and then we can replace it here, course manager. There we go. We go here. There's our course manager. Perfect. Okay, did everybody follow that? Very simple. Very, very simple, right? It's just breaking up the content here with the C, and whatever this returns is what gets replaced over here. Okay. Now let's build the course editor, but we'll use the function instead. Oh, before I do that, a very common thing that you'll see here is that instead of having a separate export here, right, you'll see this instead. You'll see the export right here, like that. Export default class course manager extends. All right, probably breaking this up a little bit so you can read it. All right, so this is very, very common as well, where you put the export and default right there next to the class. Also because only one thing can be exported by default. Right, you can export a whole bunch of things, but only one of them can be default. Okay, again, only for convenience, so yeah, you don't have to do the curly bracket destruct, right? Okay, so that renders as a course manager, perfect. All right, so let's create the course editor. All right, so we'll say new JavaScript. So this will be the course editor. Okay, now we're going to use the functional style. Okay, so the functional style is going to be const course editor, and this is a function which is going to evaluate to. We're going to return, and this will be h1 course editor. Okay, and we're going to do export default course editor. Okay, all right, and now in my index in my app, I can also import that. I can import, import course editor from course editor. There we go. And so I'm just going to put it under here. Course editor. If I go down here, notice that I have both of them. Everybody good? Let's see. There's a question on the chat. Let's see. Is the naming convention course editor right? I thought you said functions were course editor. No, the file names. The files are going to be dashes and lowercase. But the class names and the functions, right, are going to be full. Yeah, so things that are going to be used as tags are going to be all caps like that. Okay, not all caps. Sorry. What is it? A camel case. There we go. All right. So everybody good? All right. So check this out. Right. Typically from a function. Right. Not all the time, but a lot of times. Right. The only thing that this function is returning is what? It only has this return, correct? And what do we know from ES6? If you only have one statement, well, we can rewrite this. How? We can rewrite it. Let me copy this, and I'm gonna just comment it out. All right, we can rewrite it how? We can rewrite it by removing the return. Right, removing the curly brackets and just doing that. See that? So I'm just saying that this function evaluates to this h1. Boom, right? See how much terse and how much more compact, right, this style is over the class. Right? In a class, you can't do that, right? Because you have a render function, you have all this, right? And it renders just the same. Right, now at some point we want to be able to toggle, right, between the course manager. We want to be able to navigate to the course editor if we're editing a course, right? We'll learn about that a little later, right? Not just yet. Okay, so what's in the course manager? Well, we know that the course manager needs to be able to toggle between the course table and the course grid. Well, let's build those too. Let's build those, right? So we'll do the JavaScript. We'll have the course table, right? And the course table, we're going to build it using classes. Again, this is just so we practice, right? We're just practicing on how to do it one way, and also we need to learn how to do it the other way, right? So let's do the class. So we're going to do import. You always need React. Well, not for the service. You don't need the React for service, right? Because it's just a plain old JavaScript file, right? So here's this is a class. So this is when you're going to export default class, and this is the course table. I'm going to use extends React.component, and we're going to do like that, and we're going to render here. Oops, we're going to return H2. Let's use H2. And this will be a course table. Okay. All right. And we can import it from the course manager. The course manager is the one that has the course table and the course grid. Yes? Well, let's do that. We're going to import it. So here, let's import the course table. Neil, did you have a question?
Yeah, Professor. Is it mandatory for a class to be extending React.component for it to be renderable? What if we just write our own class and still have a render method? Does it still look for the render method of React?
No, it needs to extend the React component. Yeah.
Okay. Understood. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's inheriting a whole bunch of things that we're using right now. But there's a cycle functions of when you're loaded, when you're unloaded, and all these things are invoked, and and they're being inherited by the component class.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, so here's the course table, and so let's add the course table right under here. Okay, there we go. But notice that we're getting an error message, and it's because return can only really return one thing, right? It cannot return two things. Okay, so we need to wrap this inside something that merges these, right? So we're going to wrap this inside of a div. Okay, like that. Everybody good? Okay, so let's go here, and there it is. There's course manager, which contains course table. All right, let's now build the course grid. The course grid, new JavaScript. So we'll build course grid, course grid, right? And let's use the React from React, and let's use the function style, right? So it's const course grid, right? This is a plain function, and it's going to return a H2 course grid, right? And we're going to export default course grid. Okay, so that in the course manager, we can now import both. Import course grid from course grid, and then here we can just put it under here. So this is course grid. Okay, there we go. So we have the contents. Obviously, you can now think about, right? Obviously what you want to put in there, and obviously we need to think about how are we going to toggle all this content, right? Maybe show the table but not the grid, right? Show the editor but not the manager, right? How are we going to navigate? And all that we're going to use React Router DOM, which we're going to introduce a little later, on how is it that we hide certain things, show certain things, and we implement navigation without ever leaving this one page. We're still in the index page. We never want to leave it, all right? We want to just hide and show different things as we click our way through this. Can we export default functions in the same line? Yeah, no, it doesn't allow you. It's a syntax error. So yeah, you can export the function itself, but you can't export default the function. So you can export individual functions, but you can't export default the function. Yeah. All right. Excellent. So all right. So let's play around with some of this, right? So what do we have in the course table? So the course table is going to look like a table. So let's put a table in here, right? Again, if I start off with a table, right, it's going to complain, right? It's going to complain that a return can only return one thing at a time, right? So we need to wrap this. Right? We're going to need to wrap this into a div, and now we can return that. So that a table, the table, we can use the class table, obviously. If you've added Bootstrap, right, table. Okay, remember that you can't use class anymore. It's class name. We have a table. We have table row. Right, we have table data, right, and each table data, here you have the title of the course, right, CS5610, okay. So there we go. So it's a course table already starts to look like a table, right, and we have, what else do we have? What else do we have? We have who the owner is, me, and the and who the and when was it available? 2021, right? There we go, right? And then we might want some couple icons at the bottom, right? We might want the icon class, you know, AFS, AFA, trash, right, for deleting. There's a trash. We might want the pencil, so edit. There's the what else do we want? The save, like the check mark. Right, so those are all icons that we're going to need a little later. Okay. All right. Excellent. And maybe we want a whole bunch of these, right? We might want a whole bunch of rows. Well, every time you see yourself copying and pasting, okay, let me see a question. Should we use React.Fragment instead of div? Sure, you could do that as well. Yep. So every time, notice that I was copying and pasting, right? Immediately you should think about, oh, wait a minute. Instead of copying and pasting, could this be a component, right, on its own that I could maybe configure, right? Because if it's a class or a function, I could totally configure this, right? So instead of being each table row all by itself, like the assignment suggests, excuse me, like the assignment suggests, we can create a component, right? So let's create a component. So let's create a course row. So course row, right? And I'm going to use a function here. So this is going to be import React. Although I don't know if I told you if I wanted a function. I guess it should be a function. So this would be const course row function that renders as a table row. So I can grab all this content, this table row. I can grab that, right, and just replace it and put it in here, right? And then I can export default course row, right? And now, instead of having these here, instead of having that, right, which now it's not rendering, I can import the course row, and import the course row, and then I can just have a whole bunch of these course rows. Course row, I can copy a whole bunch of them. There we go. See that? That's pretty cool, right? Same thing with the grid. Same thing with the grid, but let's stick to the course row for now. Right?
Hi, Professor.
Yes.
I had a small question. So like we're going to make a lot of reusable components in React.js so we can use it. But let's say it's a large team, maybe for 7, 8, 9 developers are working together and they're working on maybe similar stuff. and all of them are making reusable components, and some of the components can be same. Some of the files, even the name is different, the functionality, the core functionality of the files could be the same. So how can we avoid in a project that a lot of developers do not make the same components and
Of
with
course.
different file names? So
Yeah.
how do like, I mean, how do I know that if I want to use a row and there's let's say there's already a developer, maybe Joe or someone who
Of
made
course.
this component and I can use it. So
Yeah,
how
yeah.
does that
So
go?
that question is not a React question. That question is a software
Okay.
engineering question, right? So
Okay. Okay.
obviously in software engineering, right, you are part of a team and folks are planning, right, and they agree that this is the library of components that we're going to be building, right, and we're not just each one working in its own vacuum, right? So obviously there's a planning that goes along and the architecture of deciding what components are reusable and whatnot, right? So that's a software engineering question.
Okay. Okay.
We're on how is it that you break up
Okay.
large application into classes and functions and reusability and blah blah blah, right? So that same question,
Okay.
I could ask you about Java or C# or any other right, any other software engineering project, right? How to make sure we're not
Yeah.
stepping on each other's toes and that we're actually reusing reusability and whatnot. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Excellent. Great question. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So notice that right now it's rendering everything the same thing, everything the same way, right? So ideally, I'd like to be able to parameterize this, right? Instead of all having the same title, ideally, I could have this be a variable that I can pass in. I mean, you're a function, right? I should be able to pass in a function, right? So to do that, right, React uses the same syntax. It uses the same syntax that you are familiar in HTML, right? So that you can use that syntax of attributes, right? For instance, I like to be able to say title, right? And say that the title, right, is CS5610, right? And that the title is here, CS, 3200, okay? And CS 5200 and whatever, right? I like to pass arguments, CS 4550. And ideally, because you're a function, ideally that would be mapped to some parameter here that I can use and then render that. That's exactly what we can do, right? So what React does for functions like this, it creates a map, right? For instance, I can pass in owner, right? And then says, me, owner, right? You, and owner, right? And then him, okay, owner, and she. Okay, so it creates a map of all the attributes. It packages into a JSON object with these being name value pairs, name value pairs. And you can grab it here. You can grab it as an object. Now that object, what we could do is we can use the destructor syntax to map all those attributes into variables here. So we can say, here's a destructor syntax that we looked at earlier this week, and I can grab the title, and I can grab the owner, right? And now I can use that as variables here, right? And so I can use title here, I can use owner, okay? If I go and render it, that's not exactly what I wanted, right? I don't want the literal title or the literal string owner. I want to evaluate these variables. So what we have to do is we have to escape this with curly brackets. Right? So we're escaping these with curly brackets, meaning we're saying evaluate those variables, and then whatever that string comes back, that's what I want to render. And there they are. See that? 8500, 5610, 5200. So I can pass arguments in here, which is pretty cool. Okay. Should you only have one function per file? So usually you want one function that does the rendering per file, but you can have other utility functions in here that function uses that typically you do not export, right? So you have private functions that this function can use, right, for iteration and sorting and doing all sorts of things and filtering, blah, 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 right? And usually those are not exported, and there's only one function, the default function, which does all the rendering. Does HTML let you have custom attributes? Yes. And here, this is not HTML, right? This is not HTML. It looks like HTML, and that's the point of JSX, right? JSX allows you to use the HTML syntax, the XML syntax, right, of attributes, element names, and slashes and blah 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 blah, right? But they get mapped into functions. They get mapped into functions, and these are mapped into attributes that get passed as arguments to those functions. Okay. So again, yeah, this is not HTML. This gets compiled into HTML, right? Yeah. So for instance, this course row gets replaced by this TR. Okay. So this whole thing gets replaced by whatever this function returns. Okay. All right. Excellent. So let's keep going. Let's keep going. So instead of having all these copying and pasting these rows, ideally I would like to have like an array, right? An array that lists all my data. Okay, so let's do that. We have this class, right? Course table. Let's create an array. Let's create an array. So this array here, we can say const courses. Okay, we can have an array. Okay, or just courses, sorry. Right, and we can have objects in here. An object that has a title, right? That has CS5610, and has the owner, me, and last modified will be whatever 1/1/2021. Okay, and we can copy a whole bunch of these, right? We can copy, right? And this will be CS5610, 4550, 3200, and this will be 5200, and this will be whatever 1, 2, whatever 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is you, me, him, her, us. Okay, and last modified December 21, 12, and 16. Okay. All right. So what I'd like to be able to do is like iterate over this, right? We'd like to iterate over this and generate this dynamically. So how do we do that? All right. So let's leave this alone, right? Because those are static. Let's now generate a whole bunch of these, but as we iterate over that array. Okay. So how do we do that? So to do that, we're going to inject here an expression. Right, we're going to inject a JavaScript expression, which what it's going to do is going to iterate over those courses, right? And it's going to, for each one of those objects, is going to append one of these course row objects, yes, elements. And we're going to use the map function. The map function. Remember, the map iterates over an array, and then it accumulates. Right, all the returns, whatever it returns, it gets accumulated, right, and then the resulting, it's the new thing that gets added. Okay, so let's do that. We're going to grab course, that courses. We're going to do the map, and each as I iterate is going to give me one course, and it's going to evaluate to a course row. There we go. See that? All right, so let's try it out. There we go. See that? It just copied and pasted. It copied and pasted this over and over and over. Right? It generated this over and over. So what we could do, right, is instead of, I can break this up so it's maybe a little bit easier to read. Instead of passing this hard-coded value, I can pass in the title of that particular course, right? So I can replace this with an expression. I want an expression I want to evaluate the course, and I want to pass the title. And same thing for the owner, right? I want to evaluate the current course. I want to pass in the owner. Okay. And we can also pass in the last modified. Last modified, right? It'll be the course dot last modified. There we go. See that? And now we have this dynamic. See that? This is all dynamic. Me, you, right? All these are hard-coded. Well, they're hard-coded, these first 4 here. Now we can comment this out, really. We can comment that out, right? And we only get those 5 that are dynamically rendered in the array. Okay? That makes sense? Everybody still with me? Did I lose anybody? Okay, yeah, so this is something that we're going to be using quite a lot, right? Where we grab some array, right, and we iterate over it, and then we dynamically generate a whole bunch of content. Okay, very, very common technique. Now, notice that we're ignoring the last modified. So let's change that. Let's go in there and put last modified. Remember that the order modified, the order of these over here doesn't matter, right? Because you're extracting by the name of the elements of the property that you're passing, not by its location, right, in the object. Remember, arrays have indices and they have positions, you know, the 0, 1, 2, 3, the index, whereas objects, right, they are a set of properties that don't have any particular order, right? So that's why even though I am passing these in any particular order, right, I am, you know, this is a map, right, which I'm retrieving the, you know, by the name of the property, right? So I can now, oops, I can say, I can replace this. And now it's dynamic. Everybody good? Everybody still with me? Okay. Now, instead of passing each individual attribute, I could instead pass the entire object, right? So let me show you. I could instead say course and just pass the whole course instead of doing this, right? So over here, I can just say, oh, you're passing me the course. If you're passing me the course, then I can do the indirection. I can do it here instead of doing it above on the attribute, right? So maybe this is a little more readable, okay? And this does exactly the same thing, right? So you could do it either way, right? You can have either way. Now, sometimes this is a very long list of attributes, so it's a good practice to put it all in a new line. Also, because when you put them in a new line like that, right, you can put default values. You can say, well, if you don't pass me the last modified, I'm going to default to 1/1/2021. Right? If you don't pass me the title, I'm going to default to unknown, you know, unknown. You can't type unknown course, and the owner, you know, who knows. Okay. You can default to those values. So if you don't pass those values, that's fine. Like for instance, if I didn't pass the owner, it would default to who knows, right? Again, those are all features we looked at earlier this week that were all ES6, right? All right, everybody good? Everybody's still with me? In this case, shouldn't the 3-letter statement be removed? The 3-letter be removed since we're directly passing the whole. Yes, of course. Yes, if you are passing just a course, notice that these are now no longer needed, right? I'm just showing you, different ways. You can pass them individually. You can pass the whole object, right? And decide to do it the indirection, do it either inside of the component or doing it from when you're passing it, right? Again, all these are all engineering questions, right? That your engineering team, as they're architecting the application, they're deciding, what should be the signature of your functions, right? And And all good architects, define a very well-known API, right? A set of arguments that each function is going to receive, right? And then everybody goes out and implements the applications based on those decisions, right? Here, we're straddling between all, what's best practice, but we're also just showing you, all the various things that are possible, right? And some things that you can decide to do one way or another. All right, so there we go. So we have that. Oops. The course row. Let's now go back here, okay? And say I want to be able to add or remove elements from my course table, okay? Well, for that, I need to have somewhat of like an event handler, right? That allows me to remove and allows me to change this array over time, okay? For that, I would need this class to have state management, right? It needs to be able to know that this array is changing over time. So to do that, right, I'm going to introduce the idea of state. Okay, classes can maintain a state. All right, so instead of this calling, but to maintain state, you have to follow certain naming conventions, right, that are specific to React, right? So, for instance, React, to maintain state, React asks you to use certain functions to update the state of the class, right? And that you follow a certain set of rules, right? So one of the rules is that what we're going to do is that we're going to declare a variable. We'll call it state. Okay, right? And now and this state is going to represent the changing of the state of the application or the component as you interact with it, like add, remove, update, and things like that. Okay. Now this state is going to contain everything that you need to know about the state of this component. In particular, the courses would be part of that state. Okay. So what we're going to do is that we're going to move the courses into the state. Right. I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to paste it in here. Right. And this is going to be written in JSON format. Right, that's the only difference. The only difference is that this is no longer a variable, right? Now it's a property inside of a variable, okay? All right, and the only difference that we need to change here is that instead of this being this.courses, this would be this.state.courses. That's the only difference, okay? And this works just the same, right? No difference there. But because this is now a state variable, I can use all the API that React gives me about how to maintain and modify and mutate the state as I interact with it. Okay, all right. So let's play around first with adding a course. Right? How about adding a course? Okay. So let's have a button. Let's add a button here. Maybe here we're gonna say button, and we're gonna say add course. Okay, there's our add course. So first of all, we need to be able to bind for a click event on that button, right? So that we can know that we want to add a button, right? So how do we do that? Well, we first create an event handler. All right, I'm gonna comment this out because we're not using this anymore, right? We're not using that anymore. We're gonna have an event handler, and an event handler is gonna be just like any function, right? It's gonna say, add course. It's going to be a function that I can invoke. Okay, and just to make sure that it is working, I'm just going to put an alert add course. Okay, and the way we're going to bind it is by using the onClick. OnClick is native to JavaScript, right? This is plain old JavaScript. That if you click this, right, it will call whatever function you tell it, right? And you can say add course. There we go. It's going to run this.add course. See that? Right? And if I click on it, now add course, notice that it brings up the alert. So perfect. It is working. Okay? Excellent. So what do we want to do here? We want to change this state. We want to change this state. Okay. So you would be, you would assume that it would be as easy as doing the following, right? Creating a new course, right? So const new course, right? So it would be title new course, okay, and owner, let's say it's me, and last modified is today to 10/2021. Okay, and we just, since this is an array, I should just be able to just push into that array. Right? I could say, this dot state dot courses dot push. Right? It's just an array, and you say new course. Okay. All right. So let's try it. Let's try it out. It doesn't quite work. It doesn't quite work. Okay. And the reason it doesn't work is that yes, we are actually changing that state, right? But React doesn't know about it, right? React needs to be notified that the state has changed, and if the state changes, we should re-render the content. Okay, let's see. Question. In onClick, when you say bind, is that the same meaning when you say bind in, put the delete function inside user render so that delete will bind every time? Would you elaborate on what bind means? Binds just means that I am telling the browser that to register an event handler, this function, on that element, meaning that now the browser, when it receives a click on that element, it'll call whatever function was registered to it. Okay, it's an observer pattern where you can there's a whole bunch of events, and you can ask the browser, hey, if this element is clicked, then do this, right? So that's what I mean, right? Binding means to register an event handler on a particular element, and you do it by using the onClick function or attribute. Okay. All right. So we've changed the state to notify React that the state has changed. You need to call a method that is inherited in the component by this component that you used here, right? You need to call that function to notify the component that the state has changed and we should re-render, right? And you call this dot set state. That's a function that we are inheriting from the component class that we are extending. And then you can pass in the new state, this dot state. Okay, and now see that I click and it just is adding new elements down below. See that? Very good. Just adding that. Make sense? Right? So if I refresh, obviously they're gone. They're not doing anything. So we're adding, and we're adding at the bottom. Okay? All right, excellent. Yeah, so this .set state notifies React that the state has changed, and it should re-render and reiterate, iterate over the whole thing and re-render the DOM. Okay. Let's see. Do we have time? No, I think we ran out of time. So what time does this end? 4:30 or 5?
4:30, Professor.
4:30. Okay. All right. That's fine. So yeah. So next week we're going to be working a little further on this, but certainly I would get started on implementing all the nuts and bolts of creating the top level components, the app component, adding the course manager, bringing in all the course editor, right? And getting as far as you can, right, on implementing this. Also, I would get started at least getting the course grid, at least the static portion of it, getting that going so that it looks as much as possible to what this looks like, even if it's static, right? Although you already see how we can make it some render dynamically, right? One of the things that we're going to do next week is that, see this state over here, this state that lists all these courses? Well, it's going to be the same course, right? It's the same course for the grid, and it's the same course for the table, right? So perhaps this state, a better place to put this, instead of putting it down in the table, right? Because of the table and the grid share the same array, they're both editing the same array, a better place to put this, right, would be to put this state up here, right? Put it above the two, and then you can pass down to the here. You can pass in the courses. You can pass down the this dot state dot courses to both of them, right? You can pass the same courses to both of them, so that locally each table and the grid can render the same array, right? Can render the same array, all right? But that we'll talk about that when we come back next week. Okay. All right. Hi, Professor. Issues quiz. Yeah, we can take a look at that a little later. 22nd, according to Cameron. What does this do? Yes, it's due on the 22nd. So you have this weekend and you have next weekend, right, to complete this assignment. And I will push this. Yes, I'll create a new repo and you'll have this code to get started. Very good. Thank you. All right, everyone. Office hours next Monday. Yes, I'll have office hours next Monday.
Hi, Professor. Can I ask a question?
Sure, what's up?
Yeah, so about bind, I'm a little bit confused because
yes,
in our code, if we don't put delete button under render user, and
yes,
it will just, so it's about this time's homework assignment.
Yes.
So I was wondering, where does bind happen in our code? Because there is a little experiment that I did. So if we put the delete function outside the render users, if we use console log to print ID just by clicking the button, each time it's different ID. So it works.
Yep.
But if we add the splice to delete array items, it doesn't work. It can only delete once. So what does bind mean? Why?
Yeah, it means what you think it means, right? It means take an element and register a function and then and invoke it when the event occurs, right? Now, many things could go wrong when you try to do that, right? When you say, bind it to an element, meaning find the element and then attach this function to it, so that call it when you click it. Well, one of the things that could go wrong is that the element is not there, right? And you look for it and it's gone. It's not actually in the DOM, right? Either because you did it too early and the element has not yet been added to the DOM and you thought it was there, but it's not actually there, or it's not, or it's too late, right? It could be that if the element was there, but something else removed it, and the browser didn't find the element that you were looking for. So I suspect what's happening to you is that either you're binding too early or too late, and any new elements that you generate, for instance, when you loop through the array, you're adding a whole bunch of new elements that have not yet been bounded. That's why I was putting the binding, the dot click, I was putting it right after the array, the for loop, right? And so after I do the for loop and I add a whole bunch of rows, right? I right after that, then I am guaranteed that those rows now have been added, and it's a good time now to bind the events, right? But if you do it later or too early, then maybe just one of them will be bound, but not any new ones, right? That's why we were putting it right after the array when we were rendering it. But I saw some students were putting it outside or putting it, and so it was binding only once and not for all of them.
Okay, so if we don't use splice, then we are not changing the object. So it's okay if we click delete several times and it will give me different IDs. But if we do use splice, then the object is changed. So it's not okay if we don't.
Well, the IDs should always be the IDs for the objects that are on the server, right? These IDs should not be random IDs or even generated IDs. The IDs should always be the IDs that come back from the server.
Yes, yes. So
I don't know what you mean by it increments the ID.
Oh no, I am not saying it's incrementing the ID. I'm saying if we don't use splice, then if we just test whether delete can work if we click at different time, but put it outside the render users.
I mean, you can put it outside. It doesn't have to be in that function, but it has to be executed after you know that the rows have all been rendered. So for instance, it could be, when you first search it, right? When you do, find all whatever, right? And then when that comes back and it's rendered, then you can call the, the bind function that binds that class to that particular function, because it has been rendered, right? But I think the easiest place to put it is right inside of the render function, right after that for loop. That's the most convenient guarantee, right? That you're binding it right after you've iterated over those array and added all those rows into the table, and you're guaranteed that once I've added them, I should not forget to bind all those delete buttons that you just added, bind them to that function so that they can all call that function.
Oh, so every time I call that function, I'm
yeah, because that function empties the row. Remember, that function says throw away all the rows, right, with the dot empty,
yeah.
and then iterate over the array and regenerate all those DOM elements, right? So all those rows that you had bound earlier, they don't exist anymore. They're gone, right? And these are brand new rows that you just added to the table. They happen to have the same ID, maybe, right? But then they need to be rebound because they're brand new DOM elements.
Okay.
Now you can be more sophisticated and maybe not throw away all the rows. You can be more sophisticated and say, oh, if you're deleting this one row, I'll only remove that one DOM, right? All the other DOM elements are staying, right? And I don't have to regenerate all of them. So if they were bound already earlier, they will still be bound, right, to the event handler. And that's actually what React does. React, right, when it's iterating over this, right, and it's regenerating these rows, it's actually very economical and knows that if you are adding new ones, here, even if you're adding a new element here, it doesn't actually throw away all the old rows, right? It checks the states and see the changes between the old state and the new state and sees, you just have one additional object. I'll only render that one object, right? All the other ones, I'll leave them alone and not throw them away. So React is very, very economical and optimizes the access to the DOM, because modifying the DOM is very expensive. It takes, especially for performance, if you're doing something that is rendering hundreds or thousands of rows, you want to optimize the time that you go in and out and write into the DOM. So React optimizes all that and says, okay, well, you have 100 elements, but I'm removing just one of them. I'm not going to re-render 99, right? I'm just going to remove that one, and it's very, very optimal on how it modifies the DOM. Wouldn't you do that, right? Because we weren't trying to rewrite React, right? So we did it the brute force. We just threw away the entire content of the T body, all those rows, and we re-rendered all of them. But then that cost us having to rebind, right, all those new elements to the event handler.
Oh, when you're talking about rebind, does create function needs to be rebind? I don't think so.
Well, when you create a new one, right, it adds a new element in the array, and it needs to re-render all the rows, right?
Oh, it's
so when it re-renders all of them, it needs to rebind them again.
It also needs to be rebind again.
Yes, exactly, because you're iterating over the entire row, and that's the way we implemented it. of throwing away all the rows and re-rendering all the rows. I mean, you could be more nuanced, right? And for instance, in the create, for instance, you might push an element to the row, right, to the array, and instead of throwing away the rows, you can do an append, right? And it would just only add one element at the bottom, right? Instead of removing all the t-body, right? So that means that you would only have to bind this new element instead of binding all of them.
Okay, but why create it outside render users and it works? Not only bind once for create, but only once for delete. What's the difference between create and delete? Why delete needs to be at the end of render users?
Again, always to guarantee that it grabs all the elements and binds all the elements.
So create don't need.
Create also calls render all the users.
Also. Okay.
Yeah, delete calls render all users. Create calls render all users. They all call render all users.
Render all users, but delete needs to be at the end of render users, like
the binding. Yes, the binding. Yes.
For binding, but create don't need the binding. It don't need to be.
But create calls render all users, which removes all the users and it re-renders all the users, and so it has to rebind.
Oh, it also does this. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
All right. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, Professor.
Yes.
I had the question about the quiz. I just wanted to make sure I stayed on to clarify that with you.
Let's take this offline.
Sure. Sounds good.